Title: The Cost of Secrets, A Journey of Love, Wealth, and Self-Discovery. Life had always been a delicate balancing act for Mary, a woman who had built a life based on simplicity and minimalism. At 28 years old, she had carefully crafted a sanctuary for herself in a modest apartment located in the heart of a bustling Canadian city. Despite the surrounding chaos of towering skyscrapers and noisy streets, her home offered a peaceful escape from the materialistic world, a world she had deliberately distanced herself from. For Mary, the quiet rituals of daily life, like brewing tea or reading a book on her small balcony, were worth more than any luxury. But there was a part of Mary's life that she kept hidden, even from her long-term boyfriend, James. That secret wasn't about anything scandalous or illegal. It was about money, or rather, the enormous wealth she had left behind in Italy. Growing up, Mary had been surrounded by opulence. Her family owned sprawling estates in the Italian countryside, filled with priceless art, olive groves, and vineyards that stretched for miles. But to her, it always felt like a golden cage. The dinners that lasted until the early hours of the morning, the political conversations infused with gestures and passion, and the air of wealth that dominated every interaction were overwhelming. When she moved to Canada for university, she slowly began to shed the weight of that life. She wanted to be just Mary, not the future custodian of wealth that had been passed down for generations. James, her boyfriend of 3 years, knew none of this. He came from a modest background, worked hard for everything he had, and cherished the same simple pleasures Mary did. Weekends at local markets, cooking meals together, hiking in the countryside. Mary valued these moments, as they made her feel free from the expectations that came with her family's wealth. But she feared that if James ever knew about her financial background, it would change the dynamic between them. That fear became a reality sooner than she anticipated when a family event in Italy began to unravel everything. The invitation came suddenly. Mary's grandmother was turning 80, and her presence was requested at the family estate in Tuscany. Initially, Mary considered going alone, but after much thought, she invited James. She felt a mixture of excitement and dread, knowing that this trip could change everything between them. James had never left North America, and this trip would be his first time experiencing Italy, her homeland, and the extravagant lifestyle she had kept hidden. As they arrived at the grand villa perched atop a hill in Tuscany, James was immediately in awe. The sprawling vineyards, the ancient stones of the villa glowing under the setting sun, and the endless luxury took his breath away. Mary could feel the subtle shift in James as they navigated through her family's estate. He was enchanted by the lifestyle, but also increasingly curious about how it all worked. As the days passed, James's questions grew more pointed, his fascination with Mary's family's wealth more pronounced. What began as simple curiosity soon turned into something more unsettling. He wanted to know how the inheritance would work, who controlled the estates, and what Mary's role was in all of it. She had hoped to keep these discussions at bay, but as they strolled through the vineyards, she found herself explaining more than she ever intended. After their return to Canada, everything felt different. The modest apartment that had once felt like a cozy nest now seemed small and inadequate in James's eyes. He started making suggestions. Why don't they buy a bigger house? Wouldn't it be great to have a new car? What if they planned a trip around the world? At first, Mary brushed it off as excitement from the trip, but soon it became clear that James's views on their financial future had shifted. Mary began to feel the strain of his new expectations. Conversations about their future, once filled with dreams of adventure and simplicity, were now focused on how they could use Mary's wealth to elevate their lives. The tension between them grew, especially when James started dropping hints at social gatherings, suggesting to friends that they might be moving into a bigger place soon or buying luxury items. It was during one of these events that everything came to a head. At a friend's party, James casually mentioned Mary's family's wealth, something she had never shared with anyone outside their relationship. The betrayal stung deeply. What had once been her private, well-guarded secret was now being used as a way for James to impress others. That night, when Mary confronted him, it became clear that their relationship was on the brink of collapse. James pleaded with Mary, trying to make her understand that he hadn't meant any harm. But the damage was done. Their relationship had moved from one of mutual respect and love to something transactional, where money had become a central factor. Mary, heartbroken and confused, wondered how everything had gone so wrong. The lifestyle that she had worked so hard to leave behind was now the very thing that was threatening to tear them apart. As days turned into weeks, the cracks in their relationship deepened. Financial discussions, once rare, became frequent and filled with tension. Mary could see that James had started to view her money as theirs, and it became clear that this was not the life she wanted. The more she tried to hold on to the simplicity that once defined their relationship, the more distant James seemed to grow. Eventually, Mary made the difficult decision to end the relationship. She knew that if she continued down this path, she would lose herself in the process. James's desires for a life of luxury didn't align with the values she held dear. She realized that her wealth, while a part of her family's legacy, didn't define who she was, and she couldn't let it become the focal point of her relationship. As Mary moved forward from the breakup, she began to reflect on the lessons she had learned. One of the most important realizations was that wealth, while it can offer comfort and security, can also bring complications if not managed carefully. In her case, it wasn't just about the money. It was about the expectations and responsibilities that came with it. The relationship with James had taught her that trust and mutual respect are the foundation of any strong relationship. Once those were compromised, it was difficult to rebuild what they had. She also learned that secrets, even those meant to protect, can create barriers. While she had hidden her family's wealth out of fear, that secrecy had ultimately contributed to the breakdown of her relationship. However, the end of her relationship also brought her a sense of clarity. Mary began to focus on herself again, on the things that brought her joy and fulfillment outside of her family's wealth. She rediscovered her passion for art, taking up painting as a way to express her emotions. She spent more time with friends who valued her for who she was, not for what she had. In the months that followed, Mary began to heal. She realized that true happiness comes from within, not from external validation or material possessions. She learned to set boundaries and protect her peace, even if it meant letting go of people who didn't align with her values. Her breakup with James wasn't just the end of a relationship. It was the beginning of a new chapter in her life. It marked a turning point where she began to prioritize her own happiness and well-being. She understood that love, while important, cannot survive without trust and a shared vision for the future. In the end, Mary found peace not in the grandeur of her family's wealth, but in the quiet moments she had always cherished. She knew that moving forward, she would be more mindful of the people she let into her life and the values they shared. And while she still carried the legacy of her family's wealth, she was determined to live a life that reflected her own beliefs, not those imposed by others. A journey through love, loss, and rediscovery. There are moments in life when you look back at who you were, and it feels like you're watching a different person altogether. Sometimes it's not a sudden change, but a gradual shift. For me, the realization of how much I had changed didn't come all at once. Instead, it came quietly, like a soft breeze that eventually grows into a storm. I still remember the first time I met her. She had this whimsical, fairy tale-like presence. It wasn't just in the way she dressed, though that was certainly part of it. She had a certain grace, a mysterious charm that made you feel like she wasn't from this world. Her long, flowing skirts and intricate lace blouses seemed like something out of a storybook, and everywhere she went, people noticed. I was no different. We started out as friends during our college years. Our connection was light and easy. We'd meet up between classes, study together, and hang out with mutual friends. I admired her from afar back then. There was something magnetic about her, even though she didn't seem to belong in the everyday hustle of our lives. I didn't expect that one day we'd become something more. Our relationship only deepened after graduation, when life's usual distractions faded, and we began to truly see each other. The months that followed were filled with quiet joy, moments of shared laughter, and a deepening connection. But even then, I could feel the cracks starting to form. Not in her. She was still the same, still enchanting, but in me. I couldn't admit it then, but looking back, I was already beginning to feel uneasy. The thing that had drawn me to her was also becoming the thing that pushed me away. She lived her life with a sense of theatricality that I had never seen before. Her entire world revolved around her unique style, and not just in private. She maintained a popular blog where she shared fashion tips, posted pictures of her outfits, and even sold handmade pieces through her online store. Everywhere we went, she was the center of attention. People would stop, stare, and sometimes even take photos. At first, I found it charming, like I was dating someone who had stepped out of a fantasy novel. But over time, that attention started to wear on me. There was one moment, during one of our outings, that still sticks in my mind. We were walking through the park, just enjoying a warm afternoon. She was dressed in one of her more extravagant outfits, a long, flowing skirt with layers of lace and a delicate flower crown. People couldn't help but look. A few even asked if they could take a picture with her, thinking she was part of some event or festival. I remember standing there, watching as she posed with strangers, smiling and chatting as if this were completely normal. It was then that I felt a pang of discomfort. I wasn't used to this kind of attention. It felt like I was just an extra in her world, an accessory to her fantasy life. I couldn't help but think, what if people think she's strange? What if they think we're strange together? I brushed off the feeling at the time, but that moment lingered in my mind. It was the first time I began to feel out of place in our relationship, as though her individuality and uniqueness, the very qualities I had once admired, were now isolating me. I started to worry about how others perceived us, about the attention we attracted wherever we went. It was a small insecurity at first, but it grew like a shadow over our time together. I tried to talk to her about it. One evening, after we had been dating for about a year, I gently suggested that maybe she could tone down her outfits when we went out. It wasn't that I didn't love her style. I did. But I wanted us to blend in a little more, to avoid the constant stares and attention. Her response was kind but firm. She simply left out a few accessories the next time we went out. No flower crown, maybe fewer layers, but her overall style remained the same. I realized then that her fashion wasn't just something she did. It was a part of who she was. It wasn't just about the clothes. It was about the way she expressed herself, the way she connected with the world. Asking her to change her style was, in essence, asking her to change herself. I knew I had overstepped, but at the time, I didn't fully understand why it mattered so much. I was trying to balance my love for her with my growing discomfort about how the world saw us. I didn't want to change her, but I also couldn't help the way I felt. It was a conflict I didn't know how to resolve. The end came suddenly, and I didn't expect it at all. One evening, after she finished work, she called and said she wanted to come over. I thought it would be a typical night, maybe dinner, a movie, some quiet time together. But when she walked through the door, I could tell something was off. Her usual lightness was gone, replaced by something heavier. We sat down, and after a few awkward moments, she told me she wanted to talk. I half-jokingly asked if she was breaking up with me, but the look on her face said it all before she even spoke. She explained, calmly and gently, that we were at different stages in our lives. She had dreams, aspirations that didn't seem to align with mine, and she felt like our paths were diverging. It wasn't anyone's fault, she said. It was just life. Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I sat there, stunned, as she talked about how much she valued our time together, how much she cared for me, but that she needed to move forward with her life. And that meant moving on from our relationship. She was going to pursue new opportunities in a different city, and I wasn't part of that plan. The conversation felt surreal. Here we were, sitting in our favorite cafe, the one with the mismatched chairs and quirky art on the walls. And yet the mood was somber, like the world outside had dimmed. I nodded along as she spoke, but inside, I was crumbling. This was my first real heartbreak, and I didn't know how to process it. In the days that followed, I felt like I was wandering through a fog. I kept busy, throwing myself into work and hobbies, trying to distract myself from the emptiness I felt. But it wasn't easy. Every time I opened my phone, I saw reminders of her, photos of us together, her latest blog posts, her Instagram updates. It was like I couldn't escape her, even though we were no longer together. Social media made it worse. She changed her relationship status, and suddenly, her posts were flooded with comments from other guys. Guys who looked like they fit into her world in a way I never did. It stung. I didn't think she was dating anyone new, but the attention she was getting made me feel replaceable, like our time together had meant nothing. I knew I shouldn't be checking her profile. I knew I should be focusing on my own healing, but it was hard. Every notification felt like a reminder that she was moving on, while I was stuck, trying to figure out who I was without her. I started to withdraw from social media, realizing that it was doing more harm than good. I needed space to grieve the relationship, to let go, and to find myself again. As the weeks passed, I slowly began to rediscover who I was outside of the relationship. I reconnected with old friends, picked up new hobbies, and started spending more time on the things that brought me joy. One of the things that helped the most was joining a local photography club. I had always been interested in photography, but during my time with her, I had let it fall by the wayside. Now, it became a way for me to channel my emotions. I'd spend hours wandering the city, capturing little moments of beauty. The way the light hit the buildings at sunset, the quiet stillness of the park in the early morning. It was therapeutic, a way for me to process my feelings without needing to talk about them. Through photography, I found a sense of peace. I started to appreciate the small things in life again, the things I had overlooked while I was caught up in the whirlwind of our relationship. I was still healing, but I was beginning to feel like myself again. It wasn't long after that I met my wife. She was nothing like my ex. Where my ex had been whimsical and theatrical, my wife was grounded and practical, but no less passionate about the things she loved. She had her own hobbies, running and baking, and from the beginning, I made a conscious effort to support her in ways I hadn't with my ex. I didn't try to change her or ask her to tone anything down. Instead, I encouraged her to pursue her passions, whether that meant waking up early to train for a marathon or spending a whole weekend perfecting a new recipe. In supporting her, I found that our relationship was stronger, more balanced. We weren't trying to fit into each other's lives. We were building a life together where both of us could be ourselves. I realized then that the problem in my previous relationship wasn't that she was too unique or that I didn't appreciate her. It was that I hadn't learned how to love someone for who they were without trying to mold them into what I thought they should be. It was a lesson that took heartache to learn, but it was one I was grateful for. When our daughter was born, I felt a sense of completeness I hadn't experienced before. Parenthood brought new challenges, but it also brought new joys. Watching her grow, seeing her personality emerge, was like witnessing a miracle. She was her own little person, full of energy and curiosity, and I made a promise to myself that I would never try to stifle that. As she got older, she developed her own sense of style, much like my ex. She'd mix and match colors, pick out outfits that didn't always match by traditional standards, and accessorize with headbands and bracelets that made her feel like a princess. And I loved it. I encouraged her creativity, letting her express herself in any way she wanted. The unexpected drama that shook our family. It all started innocently enough. Little did I know that what began as a small gesture of introducing a young woman to my son would snowball into one of the most emotionally complex and life-altering chapters of our family's life. At 50, I had thought I'd seen it all, learned how to navigate family dynamics, and mastered the delicate art of balancing the roles of mother, wife, and mediator. But nothing could have prepared me for what unfolded when the unspoken tensions in our family finally erupted, forcing us to confront deeper issues we had long ignored. This is the story of how my simple desire to see my son happy nearly tore my family apart, how misunderstandings festered into long-held grudges, and how we eventually found our way back to each other. If you've ever thought that family drama was something that happened only in movies, or that once you reach a certain age, life settles into predictable rhythms, let me assure you, there's always more to learn. And the lessons often come when you least expect them. It all began when my son, then 25, was involved in what he called a situationship with an influencer. I'd never heard of the term before. Apparently, it was a relationship that existed in some ambiguous middle ground. Not quite friends, not quite committed partners. He lavished her with gifts and spent time with her, but the commitment seemed one-sided, and she was exploring her options. From my perspective, it was a recipe for heartbreak, but my son seemed content to wait it out, hoping she would eventually choose him. At the same time, I met a vibrant young woman through my small boutique, where I spent most of my days surrounded by eclectic fabrics and unique finds. This girl was different. She exuded a warmth and sincerity that was refreshing. And when she expressed admiration for my son after seeing a picture of him on my desk, I thought, why not? Given that my son's relationship with the influencer wasn't exclusive, I saw no harm in connecting him with someone who seemed genuinely interested in him. So, I passed along his number. It seemed like a harmless act, a mother's attempt to nudge her son towards someone who might actually appreciate him. What I didn't anticipate was how this small act would create ripples that would later turn into tidal waves. At first, nothing happened. My son's response to the introduction was lukewarm, almost indifferent. He was still focused on the influencer, and for a while, life went on as usual. But about 4 months later, things began to shift. The situationship turned into a more formal relationship, and suddenly, the influencer was no longer weighing her options. They were officially a couple, and their social media became a curated gallery of couple photos, declarations of love, and public commitments. It was surprising to see how quickly their dynamic changed, and as their relationship solidified, I began to feel a sense of unease. The girl I had introduced to my son was now out of the picture, but that wasn't the problem. The real issue was the increasing distance between me and my son's new girlfriend. She had always been polite but cool, and now that they were officially together, that coolness turned to outright frost. Looking back, I realized this is where I made my first mistake. Instead of addressing the growing tension head-on, I tried to smooth things over by apologizing for introducing another girl to my son during the early stages of their relationship. I approached her during a family gathering, hoping to clear the air, but her response was chilly. She told me that the boundaries in their relationship were theirs to define, not mine. I was taken aback. I hadn't meant to overstep, but in her eyes, I already had. From that point on, things only got worse. No matter how hard I tried to be warm and welcoming, my son's girlfriend remained distant. She wasn't outright hostile, but there was a coldness there that I couldn't ignore. I felt like an outsider in my own family, and the more I tried to mend things, the more they seemed to unravel. I'll never forget the day I sat down with her in our cozy living room, a space usually filled with laughter and warmth, and tried to have a heart-to-heart conversation. The autumn light filtered through the windows, casting soft patterns on the carpet, but the atmosphere was anything but warm. She sat rigidly, her hands clasped in her lap, her face a mask of polite detachment. I tried to apologize again, explaining that I hadn't meant to interfere, but her response was measured and cool. She made it clear that the dynamics of her relationship with my son were not my business, and that any interference, intentional or not, was unwelcome. As she gathered her things and left the house that day, I felt a sinking feeling in my chest. My son was in love with this woman, and yet, there was this unspoken wall between us. It was as if no matter what I said or did, I couldn't break through. The real breaking point came several months later. By then, the tension in the house had reached a boiling point. My husband, who was often away for work, returned home to find our family in disarray. My daughter had grown increasingly frustrated with the situation, and my son, now deeply in love with his girlfriend, was caught in the middle. One day, after a particularly heated argument, my husband made the decision to ask my son to leave. I was shocked. I had never imagined that things would escalate to this point, and yet, here we were. My son packed his bags and left, and I was left to pick up the pieces. It was during this time that I began to reflect on where things had gone wrong. I realized that while I had good intentions, I had failed to respect the boundaries my son and his girlfriend had set. I had tried to fix things on my own terms, without really understanding what they needed, and in doing so, I had pushed them further away. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. My son's absence was a constant reminder of the rift that had formed in our family, and the tension between my daughter and her brother only made things worse. But slowly, things began to change. It wasn't easy. My husband, who had initially supported my son's eviction, softened his stance over time. He saw how much our son was hurting, and he began to regret his earlier decision. We started to have more open conversations as a family, and while the wounds were still raw, there was a growing sense that we all wanted to heal. One day, my son reached out to me. He told me that he and his girlfriend were planning to get married, and that despite everything that had happened, he wanted us to be part of their lives. It was a turning point for all of us. We began to see that the only way forward was through understanding, forgiveness, and a willingness to let go of past grievances. Months later, my son and his fiancée walked through the door of our home, this time for a family dinner. The house, which had felt so empty and cold without him, was once again filled with warmth and laughter. It wasn't easy at first. The conversations were tentative, the air still thick with unspoken tension. But as the evening progressed, something shifted. We began to take an interest in their lives, in their plans for the future. They shared their dreams of starting a business together, and their enthusiasm was contagious. Even my daughter, who had been the last holdout, began to soften. Over time, she and my son's fiancée started to build a relationship of their own, one that was based not on past misunderstandings, but on mutual respect and shared experiences. The real breakthrough came during a backyard barbecue, when my daughter and her future sister-in-law teamed up for a game of charades. The laughter that filled the air that day was a reminder of what we had been missing, and for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful. As I watched my son exchange vows with the woman he loved, surrounded by friends and family, I felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had not been easy. There had been moments when I feared our family would never recover from the rifts that had formed. But through it all, we had learned valuable lessons about love, forgiveness, and the importance of respecting each other's boundaries. Looking back, I realized that the mistake I made wasn't in introducing my son to someone else. It was in not understanding the complexity of his relationship with the woman he ultimately chose. I had tried to impose my own ideas of what was best for him, without really listening to what he wanted. And in doing so, I had created a situation that nearly tore us apart. But in the end, love and family triumphed. We learned that no matter how deep the misunderstandings, there is always a way forward, if we're willing to let go of our egos and truly listen to each other. And as we move forward into this new chapter of our lives, I know that our family is stronger for the challenges we faced. Because in the end, it's not about being right. It's about being there for each other, through thick and thin.